Hi, my name's Alistair Chapman, and in this video we're going to take a look at the exposure tools in this camera, the Sony PXW-FS7. Now those tools are the Zebra, the Waveform Monitor and the Histogram. They're all set and controlled under the VF settings page of the camera's main menu. Now something that's important to understand right from the beginning is that there are some differences in the way these behave depending on which mode the camera is in. If the camera is in custom mode, then the Zebra, Waveform and Histogram always measure what you're actually recording. Very simple. When you're in the Cine EI mode, the Zebras measure what's displayed in the viewfinder. The Waveform and Histogram measure the SDI2 signal. So if you have a LUT enabled in the viewfinder, the Zebras will be measuring the LUT levels. If you have a LUT enabled on SDI2, the Waveform and Histogram will also be measuring the LUT levels. But if there is no LUT on SDI2, then the Waveform and Histogram will be measuring the S-Log2 or S-Log3 recording levels. Let's start by looking at the Zebras. There are two Zebras in this camera. Zebras work by measuring the signal level, and when the signal reaches the level that the Zebra is set to, displaying a hatched line pattern across the picture that you see in the viewfinder. You only see this hatching in the viewfinder. It doesn't appear anywhere else and it won't affect your recordings. If we look in the menu, we'll see that we have Zebra 1 and Zebra 2. Zebra 1 is very similar to the Zebras that you'll see in the majority of video cameras. You set it to a level, the default being 70%, and when your exposure reaches 70%, the Zebra pattern will be superimposed over that part of the image. There is also a setting to control the aperture of Zebra 1. The aperture is the range in percent over which the Zebra operates. So, if you set Zebra 1 to 70%, Zebras will appear at 70%. But if the aperture is set to 10, because the window of operation is 10% wide, Zebras will actually appear from 65 to 75. You can make the aperture wider or smaller depending on your needs, but the default of 10% works very well for most applications. The default Zebra level of 70% is chosen because that normally represents the average level for skin tones when you're using 709, that's the standard gamma for normal television. Zebra 2 is slightly different to Zebra 1. Zebra 2 is designed to be used as an overexposure indication. As a result, Zebra 2 doesn't have the aperture setting because Zebra 2 will come on at the point set in the menu, the default being 100%, and it will stay on for all levels above that. So if I set my Zebras to 100% and I have something in my shot that is brighter than 100%, it will have Zebras over the top of that. The default white clip setting is 105% for PAL area and 108% for NTSC area. So that means that in custom mode, in most cases the camera will record above 100%. By having Zebra 2 set to 100%, it'll indicate that last bit of range between 100% and clipping. If you want, you can bring that level lower. So if you're using Hypergammas 1 or Hypergammas 2, which only record to 100%, you would want to bring Zebra 2 down to 90 or 95% so that it will indicate that last 5 or 10% between 90, 95 and the 100% peak recording level. In the Cine EI mode, one of the nice things about the Zebras is that they measure the LUT output. So if you're using the 709-800 to set your exposure in Cine EI, you can use your Zebras in exactly the same way as you would in custom mode. You don't need to do anything different. The Waveform and Histogram are enabled under the VF settings of the menu, under Display On Off, and video signal monitor. Remember that to see the histogram, waveform or vector scope in the viewfinder, the LUT settings for both the viewfinder and SDI2 must be exactly the same. That's to avoid confusion, as the histogram, waveform and vector scopes always measure the SDI2 signal. The histogram will be very familiar to most photographers. It measures exposure on a left to right scale, with the left side being black and the right side being the peak white recording level. As well as the left to right function, there is also an up and down function. The taller the spikes and peaks on the histogram, the greater percentage of the image is exposed at that particular level. So when you're using the histogram, what you want to look for a nicely exposed image is a spread of levels from black to white with a bulge in height or a bump in the middle of your exposure. If everything is bunched up towards the left hand end, your exposure is going to be very dark. If everything is bunched up towards the right hand end, your exposure is going to be very bright. So a nice even spread from left to right with a bump in the middle for your mid-range would normally indicate a well-exposed image. The waveform is very different to the histogram. It has a left to right scale, but the left side of the waveform simply represents the left side of the pictures that you're recording, and the right side of the waveform is the right-hand side of the picture. The bottom of the waveform is black, and the top is the peak white recording level. So as you open your aperture, the levels on the waveform will go upwards. So for good exposure, what you're normally looking for with normal 709 gamma would be your skin tones and mid-range about 3/4 of the way up the waveform, your bright highlights, clouds and things like that right at the very top, and your shadows at the bottom. The nice thing about the waveform is that because there is a left to right correlation between the waveform display and the pictures that you're recording, it's quite easy to actually pick out which parts of the picture are exposed at different levels. If you're shooting with the waveform and everything is below halfway up the waveform, then the likelihood is your image is underexposed. And if you're shooting with the waveform and everything is bunched up right at the top of the waveform, the likelihood is that everything is overexposed. If you're shooting in the Cine EI mode, the waveform display can be quite useful, although because of its small size, its use is limited. But if you're exposing a piece of white paper, the normal correct exposure level would place the white paper or white card at around 60% for both S-Log2 and S-Log3, and a grey card would be exposed at 41% for S-Log3 and 32% for S-Log2. As well as the tools for measuring exposure within the camera will also give a warning if you are over or underexposed. This highlight or low light warning is particularly useful in the Cine EI mode, because in the Cine EI mode, if you overexpose your S-Log2 or S-Log3 footage, the camera will flag up the highlight warning. You'll see this warning whether you're using a LUT or not, and it's measuring the S-Log2 and S-Log3 recording. So if you're shooting in S-Log and you see this warning, your footage is overexposed and you may need to adjust it accordingly. Or better still, use the high and low key function to check your exposure.